This is a production of O'Brien Communications.
Hi, I'm Tim O'Brien, and this is the Shaping Opinion podcast. Our guest today is David Smokler. He's the executive director of an organization called K through 12 Fairness Center. This is a division of an organization called StandWithUs. StandWithUs is a 24-year-old international nonpartisan education organization that fights antisemitism. I wanted to talk to David about free speech in the classroom. Just how much does the First Amendment protect what teachers say or what they want to say in the classroom? And what happens if a teacher or a student exercises their perceived free speech rights? And does it put students or others at risk? These are just a few of the questions we're going to cover. David, how's it going today?
It's going great. How are you?
Great. I did a little bit of reading before this interview, and I mentioned, I sort of alluded to your educational background in the intro, but I wanted to find out from you a little bit about teaching. You've been a teacher in the classroom. How long has it been since you left the classroom?
Well, I left, and then as they say in Godfather 3, they pulled me back in. I was back in the classroom actually as a high school English teacher on October 7th, 2023. I had actually applied for the job I'm in now, well, a similar job to the one that I'm in now, before October 7th. Had my interview, and then October 7th happened, and I ended up coming to Stand With Us. But I had 15 years as a classroom teacher, high school English. And then I was a high school administrator for about 12 years, assistant principal, and I was principal of a special education school. I worked for the state of Massachusetts Department of Youth Services as associate director of education for 7 years, and was feeling really. So COVID was a difficult time for school teachers and administrators. So I was principal of a school for grades 7 through 12 students with social and emotional disabilities during COVID. So that was enough for me to be an administrator. So I went back to the classroom, and I was teaching English, and then happened to see this opportunity with Stand With Us, and the rest is history.
Well, I'm always amazed at people who take certain professions, and I think education is one of them. It's a vocation. What made you want to, in the very beginning, become a teacher? Was it some experience you had as a student over the years, or what was it about your life that led you to teaching?
So it's an interesting question. I always loved reading and literature, and I did have some really seminal experiences as a high school AP English student, and just sitting around talking about books with other people who were excited about it. It just sounded great to be able to do that every day. I was really kind of an idealist. I didn't think about all the other stuff. I just wanted to be able to sit around and talk about books with kids. And that was really where I started. I was young, 20, 22, idealistic, right out of school.
What was the biggest, enlightening moment once you became a teacher? Something that either reaffirmed your dream of becoming a teacher, or maybe that thing that just totally surprised you?
Surprisingly, when I first became a teacher, so I started teaching. I couldn't get a job in a regular public school because back when I graduated undergraduate, it was 1996, and the baby boomers hadn't retired yet. So they were still in the mid end of their careers, and so I started teaching on a cross country wagon training, right? So horse-drawn covered wagons cross country for this company called Vision Quest. And it was amazing, but you can't do it for years. I mean, it was really tough. So I was really excited to get a job in a public school, which I did. I was the first new hire in years, and I was really ostracized by the rest of the department, who was, they were very much old school, desks and rows, and don't get up until it was really, really shocking. But I had a lot of fun back then, for sure.
The teacher's lounge can be an intimidating place for a newcomer, can't it?
Yeah, you don't go. I tell newcomers when I was mentoring new teachers to avoid it. Not to eat. Don't eat alone in your class. Well, if you want to eat alone in your classroom, fine. But you got to find a place to eat that's full of people who also just want to eat and relax. Because there are certain rooms that do feed off of negativity and cynicism and meanness and hate, and it's funny, like they always say, and I think there's some truth to it, that for elementary teachers, they kind of act like elementary kids, and some of their squabbles tend to be that way. And then middle school teachers tend to revert to middle school age. Then high school teachers, though, they could be really sharp-tongued for sure, just like moody teenagers. And I 100% would avoid the teachers' rooms at all costs.
But you still, obviously you stayed in it. You're committed to the whole teaching life. And there was something that brought me to you. It was actually something that you wrote. And I found it to be a pretty interesting article, because you have this sort of new chapter in your life where you're still involved with education, but you're not doing the usual English, math, and that sort of thing. It's called the K-12 Fairness Center, and it's part of an organization called StandWithUs. Could you tell us a little bit, before I ask you about that and how you became that and what your mission is, really, what is it? Well, what's the definition? What is the K-12 Fairness Center?
Thank you for asking. That's a great question. And we are, in some ways, defining ourselves as we grow right now. And what we do, what we're doing now is, on one hand, we're doing professional development for teachers and administrators. So I'll go into schools, or sometimes it's like the district office, and we'll do professional development on Jewish identity, right? And we don't go in, and people sometimes, when they're hearing I'm going in, they're maybe concerned I'm going in to do some sort of pro-Israel speech. We are Stand With Us is a pro-Israel. We are a organization that fights anti-Semitism and educates about Israel. At the K-12 Fairness Center, when I go into a school to do professional development, we are going to, so that educators know how most Jews consider their own identity. Because if you don't understand that, then you don't really understand modern anti-Semitism. And if you don't understand modern anti-Semitism, then you don't see it. And if you don't see it, then you run into some of the situations like we're seeing across the country, where anti-Semitic incidents are absolutely through the roof, many of them really shocking and heartbreaking. So we're doing the professional development for teachers and administrators. We're also doing trainings and capacity building for community organizations, parents groups, so that they can better build and maintain relationships with their K-12 districts and schools and school administrators, so that they can better prevent and respond to anti-Semitism. We're also running a K-12 Educators Network, which is for Jewish teachers and allies to provide resources and sometimes share calls to action, and doing a lot of work in that space, working to help build Jewish Affairs caucuses within the union. So there is a Jewish Affairs caucus within the National Education Association, and that has been growing in the past couple of years. And there's 50 state unions that are subsidiaries of the NEA, and then you have the AFT, which is a whole other teachers union, and so they have state affiliates as well. And so what we're really doing through that arm of the K-12 Fairness Center is to help organize within teachers unions, so that using the electoral process and organizing, rather than leave the union and further dilute further marginalize Jewish voices, right? We want Jewish teachers to stay in the unions and to organize and to fight back against the radical indoctrination that has been happening in that space. And then, we're also doing communications whenever we can. I wrote an op-ed, as I think you mentioned, and that's something I'm trying to do as often as I can as well.
Well, you mentioned obviously anti-Semitism, and that's a huge part of your mission. What you wrote about that, and I think it crosses over outside of just the realm of anti-Semitism. It's because that's not the limits of what I wanted to talk to you about. It's the whole issue of free speech in the classroom, and I know we need to look at it here, through the prism of how anti-Semitism is playing out. But I think that that what you wrote in your op-ed is something that goes well beyond that. It goes to the whole issue of, what is the teacher's right? Where does the teacher's right to free speech end, and that teacher's duty to educate the students according to a curriculum begin? And I think it even goes to what you do now, because you do these various programs for teachers, for parents, for students. So you have three constituencies when you go into these places. What would you say in terms of the schools that you go into? How many of them are public schools? How many of them are private schools that I would call friendly schools, meaning they may be Jewish private schools, or other types of private schools that aren't necessarily Jewish or otherwise, somewhere in between public and Jewish? How would you describe the breakdown?
So I first want to just say, Stand With Us itself is, we have many different departments that touch many different points. So to your point, for Jewish schools, we have a middle school program called Israel Link. And I personally don't work in that department, and they do fabulous work. And so what I'm talking about now in the K-12 space, where we are working with kids, I would say probably 80% public, 20% independent, non-Jewish, secular independent schools. I didn't come prepared with binders of facts, so
Sure.
hopefully I don't get kicked later for being wrong. But I think that's about right. I guess in the work that I've seen, I would say it's 80% public school and 20% independent, non-Jewish school.
Now, I know Jewishness is more than just a religion. We're talking about Israel.
You're saying that, yeah. Most people don't know that. Because in America, we have mostly these universal religions, right? Like Christianity is a universal religion. You can claim faith in Christ as your savior, and that's it, right? You don't need a certificate in anything. And Buddhism is a universal religion. You can become but Judaism is a peoplehood, right? And there's a religious, spiritual aspect to that peoplehood. But most Jews consider their identity as rooted in a combination of their ethnicity and their culture. There's absolutely a genetic component that's been proven, right? And there's that religious aspect. And so, we've worked sometimes helping students form Jewish clubs, affinity clubs. And there was a school in Vermont who initially refused the kids for doing it because they couldn't. It's illegal, they said, because it's a public school. You can't support a religious club. And we said, listen, we help them say, because we, in this case, helped support the students. And this, I don't take any credit for this. We have an amazing high school department where we have high school interns, and they are amazing kids. And we have a team leadership council and all of that. But we assisted them and, said they're not going to be doing any religious services, right? That's not the purpose of the club, and you actually cannot. It's unconstitutional. It's in a violation of Title VI to deny them the right to meet. And so, yeah, people just don't know.
Well, it's funny. You beat me to the punch on that, because I was going to ask you how you can get into 80% of the schools you get into that are public. And you're talking about things that cross into the like I said, the Jewish and like you said, the misconception that people think, well, that's religion. We can't have religion in the public schools. And obviously you found a way to do that. Your organization has. But I found that to be the first question really on my mind before I wanted to talk to you, because I wanted to get clarification on that. But when I read your article, and I want to get to the heart of that, because I thought you did right out of the gate, you talked about when you first became a teacher. And you were like, you even used the words kid in the candy store. You could basically choose books that you wanted to teach your kids, share with the kids, bring them an appreciation of the things that you cared so much about. And one of the old salts kind of explained to you there's certain things you can do and certain things you can't do in the classroom, because you don't work for yourself, you work for the school district, or you work for the employer, whoever owns the school. Now, fast forward to today, We have issues in the news media coming up where teachers are sort of freelancing when they're out there teaching kids, not only maybe in between lessons about math and about science and about English or literature, they're incorporating these social causes that are personal to them that may not even be in sync with the school district, but they're doing it. And then when it comes to light and they're either fired or suspended or disciplined, they claim that their freedom of speech is being infringed upon. And that's where I think I wanted to start with you. That's where I wanted, because I thought you said it better than most when I read your article about it. So tell me about what it was like then, and then we can talk about how it is today.
Yeah, so I'm an old guy, as you can see, and when I started teaching, it was the late '90s, and schools were pretty much the exact same then as they were in the '80s and in the '70s and the '60s and the '50s and the '40s and the '30s and the '20s. Right, literally, you would. If you dropped in from a time machine into a classroom, everybody would be dressed differently and the hairstyles would be different, but you'd still see like the teacher's desk in the front and rows of desks in front of it, and bells, would ring, and that would signify when you get up and when you move, and really short passing periods in between classes. And textbooks were the primary, vector of information at the time. I started teaching and we didn't have a teacher email accounts yet, right? So there may have been a web, the web we had the web, but there was no expectation for teacher email at the time. And so, as an English teacher, we had novels, but there were textbooks, and kids had 9, 10 textbooks in lockers and lugged them around. And so that is one way that things are very, very different today. And I think the other thing that's different is, I talked about how my passion and my love for literature and discussing literature with kids is sort of that spark that infected my teaching and with joy and passion. I think for a lot of younger people today, social justice is that spark, and they, with good intentions, want to, their vision of why they go into teaching is to share that spark of helping do good in the world for people. And so I do think that is something that is maybe wasn't quite as, I don't know if it wasn't as needed in the '90s, or if the world just was more, it was less fractured, and for a lot of reasons. So, you've got a combination now of maybe different reasons for wanting to go into education in a world that is increasingly dark. And, if you want to get cynical, there's no anchors anymore, and nothing to ground anyone in any kind of shared culture. And teachers are being given these guidelines, right, that we call curriculum. And in some schools, it's really, really loose, right? It's here's some things to cover, and here are some suggested books. And some schools it may be a little more prescribed, but at the end of the day, more than any time in history, teachers are responsible for bringing materials or finding materials, right, vetting them, and then bringing them into their classes. And the good news is that it's really easy, because we all have these computers. You do it on your phone, you can Google, you find things very quickly, and teachers are very adept at finding materials on the fly, and also having systems for, I'm going to use that, down the road. That'll be great for my Romeo and Juliet unit, so I'm going to put that in my folder for that. But regardless, there's a tremendous amount of things like lesson plans. There's websites where you can buy and sell lesson plans. There's free lesson plans. And now, the teachers' unions have been basically become have become curriculum machines, and they're sort of like they're pumping out all this curriculum materials, mostly about social justice issues, and so that's out there too. And so if you're a teacher and you are preparing for maybe 3 different classes, 3 different types of classes, maybe 5 classes of kids, you got 120 kids, and you got to find things every day. What are you going to bring in? And so it's really hard to be a teacher and to not bring in things that are maybe inappropriate. And at the same time, I think because the times are so they're so crazy, it's like for a lot of teachers, like everyone, it's like, well, what's the point, right? Like, what's the point? Like, if we're not fighting back in some way, what's the point of this that we're doing? And there really is such a disconnection between what people are still doing, because you do still see desks and rows, and you still do see rote memorization in public school classrooms in 2025, right? And it's really scary because we're wringing our hands for 40 years, ever since in the early 80s, Ronald Reagan's Nation at Risk study, which said we're falling behind the Soviets. But we are not preparing kids who are prepared for a 21st century world. But at the same time, who can blame us, right? I mean, it's crazy. I'm sorry. I know you bring me on here to talk, and I realize.
Well, no, that's great. I had an incident just yesterday. I was at a big box hardware store, one of the big ones, and I had to buy some studs, and it was very simple, really. And I bring this up because a high school kid waited on me. He was helping me out, and it surprised me, his lack of understanding of math. And when I think of that, I think, well, why are some of these teachers spending so much time trying to do social justice things when I'm in a big box hardware store, and I asked the kid, I said, look, I need 2x4s that are 5 foot long, and I need 1 2x4 that's 6 feet long. So that's the math problem. Now they come in different lengths. So I said, do you have any lengths where we can be more efficient, basically? So his coworker said, yeah, take a 10-foot length and you can get your 5-footers out of that. Basically cut it in half.
Right.
And the kid screwed that up. He couldn't divide by 2, even with the piece of wood right in front of him, even with a calculator on his phone. And then, but he did it. He actually screwed up a piece of wood, and he had to redo it because I told him how to do it. Cut it in the middle. And then there was another one. I needed that 6-foot length, and I thought, well, they only come in 8-foot lengths or 10-foot lengths or 12-foot lengths. And I said to him, why not just grab an 8-foot length and I'll take the extra 2 feet as scrap? He pulled out his calculator. The concept of the problem was overwhelming to him. He didn't even know what numbers to put into his calculator to come up with what I actually told him to do. He ended up taking a 12-foot piece and cutting it in half.
I think the problem, I think the problem is actually in some ways worse than you're describing, because it's not an issue with the math. It's an issue with the entire interaction, the social demand of you a member of an older generation, and the expectation of performing in front of other people and communicating. I think most likely, if he's like many kids that I see, he froze and is fumbling, but he's not thinking about math. He's just trying to get through this somehow. Please let me get through this interaction. And math, if you can use your phone to figure out, if you need to figure out 10 divided by 2 equals 5 on your phone, then fine, right?
Right.
But for me, what's more concerning is he's ill-equipped to function, not even just as not necessarily this poor kid, right? But and it's not their fault. It's not their fault. How could it be, right? They didn't create the world that they grew up in. Mm-hmm. But they just want to be get through whatever it is they're doing so that they can be back with their phone, in their rooms. Teenagers always wanted to be back, with their rooms, but there's that whole lack of, forced structure of socialization, and COVID was a big part of it. And the changing nature of parenting and how, people work now is, it's all these factors coming together. And it is absolutely scary for sure.
It is. And I think, so to your points, I guess, that you made about, obviously students are overwhelmed. They're on their screens. They're getting a different type of education. You have teachers now that are sort of bringing a lot more of themselves to the classroom than before, than when you started out. Was there in your experience, in your younger days, was there ever a time, though, that you were caught on the carpet by your principal for something that, something that you said?
All the time, every year, because but yes, and I was always, it was just over my passion and my exuberance and in my arrogance, thinking that I knew better. And in some ways, maybe I did. And in some ways, I was very naive. But yeah, and actually, when I was training to be a teacher, my cooperating teacher, who is amazing, really said, like, if you don't get called on the carpet, then you're not doing your job as a teacher. And so there is that aspect to it, but the context is so different that it's almost like I wouldn't give that advice now to a kid starting out as teaching, because then that does lead to you wearing a Free Palestine T-shirt in the classroom and your watermelon earrings, and it's a math lesson. But I could show you a math lesson that is about olives, right? And it's got embedded links to YouTube videos about Israeli settlers raising Palestinian olive trees. And the origin of it was a teach-in for Palestine that was done by the Oakland Education Association back in February of 2024. And they, at that time, released to the people who signed up for their teach-in for Palestine a large repository of Google documents and files with curriculum materials for everything from K through 12, including a coloring book for primary school kids of draw a Zionist, right? And they wanted you to make it look like some kind of monster, right? And so all the subjects then are being taught with these materials through the lens of anti-Zionism, which it's shocking, it's baffling, and it's understandable when you look at sort of how we got here. And it's very scary.
That's a question I have. How did we get here?
So, there's a lot of different aspects to it, and I think we can't discount the cultural things that we kind of been talking about. But when it comes to the issue of Israel, and it's like, we have at Stand With Us many people who are way smarter than I am, who could really talk about. They bring out the receipts, right, and they'll say, they could point all the dots, right, but there's some basic facts that people really don't know, that I think people should know, right, which is just how much the country Qatar is contributing to not just the economy of the United States and all of the U.S. sectors, but particularly in higher education, and I think also subsequently K-12 education. So from 2021 to 2025, all the nations in the world, right, contributed something like $13 billion to universities in the United States. Of all that 13 million, almost 5 billion. So what's that, like almost 40% or something like that, of all of it was from Qatar, right? So it's $5 billion from Qatar over 20 years. So U.S. colleges and universities. Study showed that at university, and none of them disclosed it, by the way. So, and at all these schools where they took $5 billion of Qatari money and didn't disclose it, incidents of anti-Semitism were higher. And that was proven in you could look at the methodology. It's the Network Contagion Research Institute who put out that study. And, so there's a tremendous amount of money and organization that has gone into influencing how our colleges and universities teach certain things, right? Or even how they approach liberal Western education, right? Because we're not just seeing anti-Israel stuff happening, we're seeing anti-Western stuff happening, right? So at these same encampments where they're saying death to Israel, they're also saying death to the United States, right? We're seeing Israeli flags burning. You're also seeing the U.S. flags burning. You see them, Columbia University taking over school buildings and taking hostages, right? Like janitors who are getting off scot-free, right? And they are seeking to again dismantle essentially Western civilization. I just made a couple of huge jumps, so I apologize there. But like trying to connect the dots. So like where did it all start coming from? The American left. Well, that was a big jump that I just went there, right? To say there, because
Right.
we know anti-Semitism comes from both sides of the political spectrum, and we also know about horseshoe theory, right? Where at the extreme right, we've got anti-Semitism that looks at Jews as not white, right? And then on the extreme left, you have them look at Jews as the perfect example of white, right? So too white almost. And so, there's that polarization has been really bad, but we recognize from the right anti-Semitism, right? So you see a swastika or you see a caricature of a Jew with a big nose, and we see that, we say, oh yeah, we're having anti-Semitism. But when you see it from the left, you've had this, and like, what is it that I'm talking about that's coming with the money, right? It's this philosophy in a sense that's kind of based on call it neo-Marxism, which is that people generally fit into a binary. Either you're oppressed or you're the oppressor. And there's what they would call intersectionality, right, by which all forms of the oppressed share certain and so talking about things in this way is like, these are like useful academic types of exercises to have, right? You can imagine in a classroom having a debate, right, with your friends about education. But K-12 education is not a place where you want academic freedom in which you're studying ideas and having these lofty ideas about whether or not Western style liberalism is we're preparing kids for their futures. And we've seen a shift from, if you ask me, like, what's the purpose of education, of K-12 education, right? What's the purpose of it? It's to inspire, to transmit education, right? You want kids to learn. So a lot of these groups out there, and we could talk about groups, they don't see the purpose of education the same. They see the purpose of education is to create activists, right? So they want to activate students, kids, to help to dismantle systems of oppression. And so the purpose of education is no longer, right, to facts and information. That's irrelevant. It's like post-truth, right? That what matters really is dismantling systems of oppression. And so if that's your focus, the only way to educate kids that way is to indoctrinate them, right? That's how you create activists. That's how cults create activists, through indoctrination. And
I've seen that. I do public relations work in my day job. I started working in the media when I was in college. And I see a parallel to what you're saying and what I've seen in my years in my career. And that is what you said. People feel that it's their job when they become a teacher to become an activist and to activate the children that they teach. It's not enough to educate. You have to persuade, basically. And
just to stop you there real quick, because it's also happening, the inverse of that. Activists are sending people into education to become teachers. So it's happening both ways, right? So you're having people who want to share their activism in education, but then there are people who are saying, we're activists, and how do you just really dismantle the system? You indoctrinate kids. So they're sending kids they're sending people to, it's wild. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to
That
interrupt.
that explains it too. When I asked you how
Yeah.
we got here, because it's the same on the media side. Is what when I started in the media, it was sort of the post Watergate years. That they lasted a while. I didn't start that long ago, but whenever but there was a long shadow after Watergate. So people who got into journalism when I did were inspired by the idea of uncovering the truth when it was hidden. And when you were idealistic, when you started your career as a teacher, and when I started mine in media, you wanted to uncover the truth. You wanted to share the truth. It was all that. And over the years, the big change that I've seen in the media is it has now today, it tends to attract people who want to be activists. It doesn't attract people who want to be truth tellers. Not that they feel that they're lying, but they feel that their truth has to have a certain aspect to it that nobody else's truth has, and
Well,
they want to bring
just
that.
like in education, we talked about the whole focus changing. I think the media you're talking about was dedicated to, like you said, uncovering the truth, and that's journalism. But that's not the purpose of the media outlets anymore at all, and they don't even hardly pretend it is. So in the same way, they need to activate people, but just as consumers, and that's similar, the same thing.
It sure is, yeah, and I see that with students. And I think what you're saying, though, you mentioned higher education, college, and then you talk about K through 12. And tell me if I'm just going to recap my own understanding of this, and you tell me if I'm wrong. But K through 12 is where we learn the basics. That's where we learn how to do math. We learn how to write. We learn subject, direct object, verb. We learn the basics. If you use a sports analogy, we learn blocking and tackling in those years. And that's because our understanding isn't fully formed yet. When we get into high school, we start to explore things like the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. We start to read good books, and our teachers start using the Socratic method at that age to get us to think. But they don't expect us to come in with the answers. They teach. When we get into college, it's a little different now. It's where the Socratic method and everything sort of comes to play. And the teacher doesn't necessarily want you to know right from wrong, not every question that has a right or wrong answer to it. The important thing is that you think it through, that you solve the problem, that there's a process. And then they bring in issues like ethics and information that never gets lost. But when you mentioned that funding from Qatar, you mentioned higher education. And I wanted to find out, it seems what you're telling me is they want to get people when they're young and they want to shape their opinions using the name of this podcast. They want to shape their worldview in a certain way that the people from Qatar would approve of. And they want to go to the biggest country and most powerful country in the world to do it. Is there a reason why they've targeted America? Is it because we're vulnerable, or is it because we're big, or are they just trying to use our freedoms against us?
I think, Tim, I think our enemies around the world are shocked at how successful all of their tactics have been to destabilize the United States. I think people will be talking about this time if we survive. Again, not to be so doom and gloom, which I guess I am being, but I think when we're talking about teachers, though, we have to keep in mind. So historically, when I talk about the history of K-12 education and teachers, doing the same thing for decade after decade after decade, for most of the time, like you didn't really need to even have a college degree to be a teacher, right? Originally, and then when teaching became a profession, right, rather than just something that women did because they were around and it was something they could do, then. You had methods courses for teachers, which covered things like the shades, how for optimum classroom management, the shades should be at what level, right? Real hard-hitting types of things like that. And basically what happened is, in some ways, they had to invent the whole, like, how teachers are educated and what is it that they do, right? That's worth a major in college or a minor or whatever. And so, a lot of it is stuffed with philosophy, and not philosophy like you're studying Plato necessarily, which would be good, but social justice types of issues then become, you've got room for it, right? Because you don't have to worry about learning the formulas that the physics students are learning, and you're not doing problem sets, right? That the math students are doing, and not to demean the education, the possibility of an amazing education for teachers, which there needs to be, and I think in some places they're doing it well, and but for the most part, there's just so much space for what we might call frivolous, what people might call, the most important thing, which is, what we're talking about, activism and social justice, and going down that path to the sort of end result, which is dismantling systems of oppression, which to them is a zero-sum game. So, if you do better, then you're taking from me, and so for me to do better, I have to take from you, and so that's the game. That's what they're trying to do.
Well, there are different organizations that are, I would say, that are supposed to be checks and balances against any undue influence over our students, our kids. You mentioned foreign government funding. That's just one issue. In your article and in some of your comments, you talk about the teachers' unions. That's another big influencer group. Then you have school boards, local, which are politically on an inherent basis. School board members are elected, so they have to be politicians to run public school districts. Then you have private school systems that are run by values-driven organizations, whether it be a Catholic school system or a Jewish school system, or even a different type of school system that isn't religious based at all, but they have a value system, and they have certain liberties they can bring to the classroom. So I don't want to use the word indoctrination, but
I use it all the time, and
it becomes indoctrination.
Well, all education is indoctrination, right? We at some level have to have a society, and we have to have some shared norms and ideals. And traditionally in America, those have been, the traditional Western ideals of what we call, liberalism, not liberal like Democrat liberal, right? And so, how do you produce citizens for that type of society? You do it through education. And so I guess when you're talking about education and indoctrination, I mean, if it's all indoctrination, what are those checks and balances so that, reasonable people can agree that this is how it's going? And, I guess there's no reasonable people left either.
I think that's the key. Yeah, that's the key. I mean, is the whole issue of reasonableness, and you have parents now that get outraged because they don't find out. We saw a lot during COVID, I think, when there were so many bad things for education that happened during COVID because kids were taken out of the classroom and sent home. But you also then had parents who for the first time started to see what was going on in the classroom because they had access. They could see what their kid was learning right online, right in the same house as them. They were all stuck together in that house. And the parents were watching these Zoom calls where the teachers were teaching some of this stuff. And I would say some of that stuff came to light, wouldn't you? Didn't some of those things come to light?
But you know what? The inverse happened too. The kids saw what we were doing. Because, you were a kid going off to school every day, and your parents went off to work every day, and then you came home and you maybe had dinner, if you're lucky to have a family dinner, and you did your homework. So, the parents saw the kids, what are they doing? And and it's like the emperor wears no clothes. These mom and dad are saying hoard toilet paper. Like they're saying, screw the other guy. Like, me, take care of ourselves. They saw that their dads, their hard day at work is really, bouncing a ball around in the office. And it's like, really like I think forever changed us. And,
it did.
And so I think that's part of the problem too, that kids don't see a stable society to aspire to become a member into.
I hear that, and I can remember that. I mean, we all have stories now about these Zoom calls,
Yeah.
and what people experienced, and now we know test scores have been affected for kids and everything. When you talked in your article about teachers unions, you made a point. You talked about the Massachusetts Teachers Association is one example that you provided in April of 2025. And you talk about these things, they're called NBIs, new business items. And I'm going to make sure I get the words right. You said that in one of their NBIs, their new business items, that teachers union said to safeguard MTA members' academic rights and to protect them from harm in an increasingly repressive environment. So they described the classroom as a repressive environment for teachers because teachers weren't allowed to freelance as much as they wanted to.
Mhm.
So the teachers unions are going to bat for this. Now, do they truly want the teachers to be able to speak what they want on an individual basis? Or is this one of those things where they're using their access to the classroom to advance their own agenda?
So I'm not sure exactly what are you in Massachusetts or
No, I'm in Pennsylvania.
you're in Pennsylvania? So, the Mass Teachers Union, Massachusetts is a relatively small state, right? There are, I think, 117,000 members of the Mass Teachers Association. And if you go on ProPublica, you can see that their revenue is about $50 million a year. And they have assets of about $150 million. So while they are promoting activism from within, at the same time, over the last election cycle, the bulk of what they were spending their money and time on was passing a ballot question to eliminate the MCAS, which is the graduation test requirement in Massachusetts that seniors you had to pass. You took it as a sophomore, but you had to pass by senior year in order to graduate. So they were successful because not only do they have a huge war chest, but they have even though the legislature is exasperated by those crazy MTA people with their anti-Semitism, at the same time, in a lot of ways they're beholden to them because they're probably, I think, if not the largest lobbying group within the Massachusetts government, they're probably at least number two, they're probably number one. And so the teachers want to be able to do whatever they want and have no accountability to anyone, right? Because the MCAS provided data to the state about teachers year over year. So yeah, you get a couple of bad years. If you're a 10th grade math teacher and your kids over your 6-year career are consistently producing poor results, the data is pretty good. I mean, and the amount of data the state collected is voluminous. It's mind-boggling, right? Who's using that data to improve instruction? Nobody, right? And so it's like, it goes deep. Obviously, way more. There's way more factors than we could discuss in an hour conversation. But that the unions want the teachers to be able to do what they want with no accountability, for sure.
Well, you said that's Massachusetts. Have you seen that to be the case in other states as well?
Yeah, California has been riling is not the word I mean. Has been roiling, I guess is the better, right? And I'm not the expert on this at all, but they had an ethnic studies bill, that requirement for high school students that was supposed to be in effect, and then the governor withheld funding. And then there was another bill that's currently stalled that was supposed to provide some guardrails, right, for how ethnic studies was being taught, because ethnic studies is being co-opted by the same movement that we're talking about in order to promote this worldview of us versus them, intersectionality of the oppressed. And so they have a massive cohort of organizations within this umbrella that's called the Coalition for Liberated Ethnic Studies. And it's a huge business. They have total millions of dollars of contracts with districts in California. And, California is the world's 5th largest economy, right? So, we're talking an economy of what, France, or more. So there's a lot right now going on about, is ethnic studies going to be a requirement? But it's well beyond California. There are ethnic studies mandates in multiple states now. I believe New Jersey has a mandate now that's people are figuring out. Vermont is working on it, Minnesota, and you're seeing it all over the country. They have a playbook that they're now using, which came from California, by which they are trying to require ethnic studies. And then ethnic studies is, in some ways, I don't call it the Trojan horse, but it's the way in to schools, right? Because who doesn't want to celebrate multiculturalism, right? But liberated ethnic studies they don't believe in multiculturalism. They don't want everybody to get along. They want that zero-sum game. So they'll tell you, if you go to the Coalition of Liberated Ethnic Studies, their website, they have a whole manifesto, and they'll say right there, that their purpose is not for truth, right? Their purpose is not for educating. They want to activate, and they'll say, we don't believe in multicultural education. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about ethnic studies. We don't have a problem in general with ethnic studies at StandWithUs, right? If you want to include Jews as traditionally oppressed minorities along with other groups, that's whatever. There's reasonable people on both sides are arguing if that's something that kids should be doing in schools. But what we're seeing is these groups using the same playbook state by state to first create mandates for either ethnic studies, or sometimes it's genocide studies, right? You're seeing some courses in genocide studies that don't mention the Holocaust, all right, in some parts of the country, right? But this is how they're getting in. And then once you've got the mandate, then it's like, all right, well, what's the curriculum going to look like? And let's get these vendors in who provide the professional development to do this and the vendors for the DEI, and we can't talk about DEI, it's too big, it's too much, right? But in that same way, there's a huge space for vendors to get huge contracts from districts with very little oversight from the people in the town. Often I will see one assistant superintendent in a district has the power it shouldn't have the power. At the end of the day, the school board will vote, but she prepares the presentation to the school board on why they should approve this $250,000 contract with X corporation to provide professional development to teachers, which is really this inroads to liberated ethnic studies, which is part of liberation theory, which is then this whole framework of systems of oppression. And
you mentioned Trojan horse a little while ago, and I thought that was a pretty good concept for the kind of things we're talking about here. And for anybody that might have taken in their 9th grade English class and read the book 1984 or Animal Farm and George Orwell, yeah. We now use it's almost cliche now when you say that was an Orwellian term when we talk about doublespeak. But I've also, because of my line of work, I've studied also all types of propaganda and communications, ethical and non-ethical, and all that sort of thing. And this concept of doublespeak has really always been on my mind, but it really seems to come to the fore these days because of the way things are packaged. Because like you said earlier, when you were talking about something else, you said, who doesn't like that? So when we talk about ethnic studies, who doesn't agree with learning about other cultures? Who could disagree with that? I could have a class and say, we're going to have a class about kindness. Who doesn't want to learn about kindness? And when you take the Orwellian approach to that, you take the thing that you're trying to do and you take the polar opposite of that concept, and that's how you package it. So if you're trying to
war is peace,
and I'm a Christian, and it boggles my mind how people have been successfully able to say Christianity is hate. Well, Christianity True Christianity is the opposite of hate. And I would say the same for Judaism. Those religions do not teach, as religions, hate. That doesn't mean you don't have hateful Christians or whatever, but that doesn't mean that the religion itself is about it. But you have groups that have been able to sort of spin it, and they've been able to associate the identity with Christian equals hate, and you can go down the line. And I think you've obviously seen the same thing with the word Zionism and all those other terms that relate to Jewishness.
Yeah, so Rabbi Sachs would talk about the mutability of anti-Semitism like a virus, right? So that when you think about the earliest kinds of anti-Semitism, it was at a time in the Middle Ages when religion was the most important value. And so Jews having a different religion were then suspect, right? And then you look at the late 1800s, the first part of the 20th century, and you start to see race, being more important, and then Jews are being attacked because they're racially inferior, right? And pure race is the highest ideal. You get phrenology and all that, and then now social justice is such a value. It's one of the highest ideals of our society, and so anti-Semitism has now muted because whatever the highest ideal of society is, the Jew is the opposite of that, right? And so you have the religious part of it still, and the blood libel, which still persists, right? You see people reporting straight face, Israel is harvesting organs. It's just repackaged over and over again, the blood libel. And then you still see the race part of it, where somehow Israel is a white settler society when the majority of Israelis are not white. So but the facts don't matter. In fact, the facts are a problem. So we need to find a way around that. We need to find around the facts, and that's where the propaganda comes in. And that's, your expertise in media can certainly talk more about where that leads.
It sure does. Now this is new to me because I like you said, I'm a boomer, and I grew up understanding. We read the Diary of Anne Frank. We the concept of never again. You didn't have to be Jewish to understand what that meant. 6 million Jews killed by Hitler. We understood who Hitler was. He wasn't a cliche. He wasn't a caricature in our generation. And so when we hear the concept never again, we know what we're told. We know what that means, and we know what led up to that, and we know that that's the reason that Germany itself was divided after World War II. You had an East Germany and a West Germany for so long because the world was just so fearful of a repeat of what happened during World War II, and they knew that was the heart of the culture that did that. Now, here we are, 2025, and it blows my mind, really. It blows my mind that so much of what we understood, shared understanding of what that was and what it represented. It wasn't just about Jewish people, that someone could be so hateful towards any group and commandeer all the resources of a nation to do what Hitler did. But you don't have to be Hitler. You don't have to be Germany. And
that's such a great point. That's such a great point, because I'm so glad you mentioned this, because this just happened yesterday. We became aware. So the National Education Association, as you mentioned, the NEA, is the largest teachers union in the country with over 3 million members, released their 2025 handbook, or it became available this week, yesterday, day before. And in it publishes an NBI that was voted on by the executive board, apparently in secrecy. And this is the first time most people are hearing about it, but it's in the handbook, available now. It is an NBI that they passed that said that the NEA will make available on its website and other outlets resources to remember on January 27th, Holocaust Memorial Day. Remember the 12 million victims of all faiths, cultures, ethnicities, and countries who lost their lives in the Holocaust. They literally erased the Jews from the Holocaust in 2025. And it wasn't Adolf Hitler, it's the National Education Association. How did we get here?
That's my question. That's where I was going with this. And I mean, I guess Was there an inflection point in the past 5-10 years? Was there this event that happened that just sort of turned everything?
Honestly, to me, the inflection point was the algorithms. So you saw the last war with Hamas before this one, Israel, was 2014. And yes, there was a huge flame up of anti-Semitism, the way there always is when Israel defends itself against an attack. And the difference now is we're all getting our news from TikTok. You're not getting your news from TikTok, I think, probably, right? But TikTok and YouTube and Instagram, and those people, even if you know it intellectually, you're not seeing reality. You are seeing the results of an algorithm that is designed to mute certain voices and amplify others, but it's also designed to engage you by activating you, by showing you more and more sensational content of the type that you like. And it knows you better than you know yourself. And so to me, that is the thing that really changed everything. How do people see Jews right now? Their whole conception of them is TikTok, Instagram, for most people. And it hasn't been kind, really hasn't.
Do you think China's control over TikTok has been a part of this too? Because there are certain things I think American-based companies would not have tolerated that TikTok obviously did.
I don't see any. I don't think those companies think of themselves as American companies. They're beyond America. They're international corporations. They're all in line. Whether you like Trump, you don't like Trump, wherever you are politically, at Trump's inauguration, right behind him, they were all there in a line. Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook. I don't think the TikTok guy was there, right? But whoever it was going to be, right? They're all in line, and so they don't think of themselves as American corporations the way you're thinking of previous generations of hardworking Americans. In fact, we're way better off being like Russia is, and that's what they want, is just complete open oligarchy with power just 100% by the rich, and a facade of a pretend democracy with end stage capitalism. I mean, it's sad. I don't look. I get up every day, right? I go to work every day, most days, and because I don't think it's too late. I don't want to leave this on like such a sad tone, because I have been so I think apocalyptic, but it's hard not to be doing this work. And from my angle, I can't do everything, and so doing what I can to help where I can, which in my day is K-12, right? So I'm working with teachers, I'm working with administrators, and I do what I can do to help educate people about who the Jews are and how we see our identity, the most of us. Look, Jews have been around for a long time, and not going anywhere. So
I just have one final question for you, and it kind of goes to one I asked you earlier. Before I asked you earlier in this interview, I asked you for an example of when you were caught on the carpet. I'm going to ask you for the flip side of that now, because in the work that you do today, can you think of a recent moment that gave you that hope? Can you think of a recent moment that something somebody said to you, or some question somebody asked of you, or something somebody did after one of your training sessions, and it made you feel that your work is making a difference?
That's a good question. I think we were very lucky to be able to do professional development for school administrators in suburban New York City, but it's in southwestern Connecticut. And we had 4 hours. It was like crazy. I had never done a 4-hour professional development before. And just on the way out, people were basically chasing us out, saying we had no idea, right? Because if you don't understand who the Jews are, you don't understand Jewish identity, then you don't understand anti-Semitism, modern anti-Semitism. You think you don't have it, right? You don't see it. It doesn't exist. And so for people who are genuinely good people and want to do what's right by all people, and they think of inclusion, right? When you think of DEI, diversity is great, right? Inclusion, we all want to be included. That's fantastic. And so if you believe those things, then education and hearing from me is going to let you see, oh, okay, now I get it. I understand why this anti-Zionism is actually anti-Semitic.
Could you say what that actually means to you when you say anti-Zionism?
Yeah, sure. So, Zionism is a term that's been purposefully turned into a slur, right? Which, again, your background in media and communications, you can see how effective that's been. But for most Jews, when you add, and we're not a monolith like any group, but for most Jews, what Zionism is the belief that Jews, like all people, deserve the right to self-determination in their traditional indigenous homeland. And if you think that every group of people deserve that right, if you are a person who in America today is doing a land reclamation before every meeting in your school district, right, which we're seeing in school board meetings, they do this land traditionally has been held by this, and but for some reason, of all the people who deserve right to self-determination in their indigenous homeland, the Jews somehow don't, then yeah, I do think that's anti-Semitic.
David Smokler, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
The Shaping Opinion podcast is a production of O'Brien Communications, copyright O'Brien Communications 2025. Find us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you like to watch, go to YouTube, Rumble, or our Substack page, shapingopinion.com.